Oh, said the trucks. We want a proper engine, not a red monster. James took no notice and started as soon as the guard was ready. Come along, he puffed.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode we're going to be looking at a couple of Thomas & Friends locomotives that date from the mid-1990s and were made by Hornby Railways. First off, we're going to be looking at this fan favourite, which is James the red engine. As you can see there, the front wheels, which should be free running, look to be seized up, but the body shell in the cosmetic condition of this loco looks to be very good. These wheels at the front should be very free running as the motor's in the tender, but these are extremely stiff, so we're going to have to disassemble this and find out what's going on. First off though, we're going to put him on the track and give him a quick battery test to see if he is actually a runner or not. Applying power to the rails, you can see there that there's no life at all. So there's obviously something amiss with this James loco. We do get a couple of sparks of life, but nothing like he should be. So let's crack on with this rebuild. To disassemble James's front section, first off I removed the front pony truck there, but it took me a while to figure out how to remove the body shell. It's an unusual design in the fact that once I took this screw out, I thought that held the body shell onto the chassis, but it doesn't. Looking around the model, and after about 10 minutes of head scratching, I discovered there's actually a screw on this side which goes through the body shell and into a metal weight on the chassis. Removing this screw allows the chassis to drop down from the body shell. This chassis dates from Triang days, and I'm pretty certain this is an old Triang Ginty chassis that was produced from the 1950s to the 1970s and has been repurposed for James's front driving wheels. To loosen up the driving wheels, I'm going to put it in this tray and give it a liberal coating of this WD-40 contact cleaner to remove all the built-up crud and old lubrication that's stopping the wheels from turning. And it doesn't take long for it to all run out and the wheels free themselves up quite nicely. As you can see, they are turning loads better than they were before. That contact cleaner really is good stuff, and look at that, just look at the difference in those wheels to what we started with less than a couple of minutes ago. Now that the front's been loosened off, I'm going to look at the Ringfield motor that's in this tender and give it a general service, as obviously it's not running very well, and who knows when this was last serviced, probably when it left the factory in the mid-90s. Giving the motor a battery test across the brush terminals, the motor spins quite nicely, so I know that we're on to a winner already. To remove the tender chassis frame, insert a small flat-bladed screwdriver and just unclip it from each end, and the Ringfield motor unit will lift out with the wheels complete. I then remove the cog retaining clip there and remove all the drive cogs, along with this centre wheel which holds the motor faceplate in place. By inserting a flat-bladed screwdriver behind the wheel, it just comes off quite nicely. I then undo the brush terminals there, but be careful doing this as there is a spring behind each of these, and if you don't hold it in place they can spring out and you will lose the spring into the ether, and you'll be left with a situation where you have to buy more spare parts to put your loco back on the track. It's worth noting that the left hand screw is also longer than the right hand screw, as the left hand screw goes through the motor faceplate and connects with the metal die-cast chassis and aids with pickup. Just look at this congealed grease around this motor gear housing here, that's probably been in there from the mid-90s when this left the factory in Margate. I'll remove this small capacitor and keep that in the magnetic tray, and then a small flat-bladed screwdriver unclips the front of the Ringfield motor plate. And you can see there that the commutator faceplate isn't actually too bad. So I use my usual method of cotton buds and methylated spirits and give it a good polishing up. The carbon build-up on this comes off relatively easily, and then I use a cocktail stick just to clear out the gaps in the armature faceplate there, just to remove any built-up carbon. After that's done, any stubborn bits of carbon on the edges can be removed with gentle persuasion using my fiberglass pencil. Then one final polish up with the cotton bud and meths, and we're good to start reassembling this already. Just look at how that commutator faceplate looks. Probably wasn't that clean when it came out of the factory. The faceplate there has had a going over with the contact cleaner just to remove all that old built up grease that was in all the recesses, and then it's clipped back onto the front of the Ringfield motor. Once it's in place, I reassert all the gears and give them a slight lubrication with the gear oil. I've reasserted the brushes and springs and give it a test, and this motor's running nice and smooth now without a sound. The traction tyres on this model had actually solidified, so I've removed them both, and now looking through my spares bin, I'm going to pick out two that fit these wheels and fit them. And then we'll reinsert the middle wheel, and the Ringfield motor rebuild is almost complete. The traction tyres should be quite a tight fit and fit in the grooves on the wheels without protruding on the outside. If they protrude on the outside, you'll end up with a wobbly running loco. Using the battery to test the motor, I just give them a torque test there by putting a screwdriver on them to make sure that the tyres aren't slipping, and then reinsert the middle wheel, and then this tender chassis frame is ready to be reunited with its base plate. I give the axles there a quick lubrication as well, as I said, all the lubrication from this model has either dried up or been cleaned off with the contact cleaner. You don't need to overdo the lubrication, just a small dot on each axle will do. The tender frame there was just dusty, so I'll give it a good dusting over with a stiff paintbrush, and then I reapply the Ringfield motor unit into it, and this fits one way round and it clips into the holes in the tender chassis there. Once it's clipped in, I reapply the wire from the pickups on the tender pickup there, and we can refit the top of the tender. A quick battery test across the terminals there proves that everything's working, and the tender top, all that this requires is a good dusting with a paintbrush as well. The cosmetics on this model are in quite good condition. All the lining and numbering is complete, as is the bright red livery of this James model. This simply, when you took the wire in, this simply just clips back in place, and the tender is fully serviced, ready for another 20 years of use. The wheels on the front here, I'm going to give a quick clean up with the cotton bud and meths, just to remove any carbon build-up. And the middle wheels there, you can see are ready to fit traction tyres to, but they're not necessary, as this chassis does not provide any drive at all. This is pickup only. I'm also going to give those wheels a quick bit of lubrication as well, using the same gear oil we did before. So I refit the pony truck there onto the front and ensure that wheel is turning nicely, and that receives a little bit of lubrication as well. And now James's front body shell gets a good dusting over with the same paintbrush, as there's quite a lot of dust in the cab. It's interesting to note there's some holes on the buffer beam there, so I'm not sure if this model should have come with customer fit lamp irons, but there's certainly the holes there to accept them. To refit the body, there's a clip that you have to engage in the back. The chassis pushes up into the body shell, and then you can refit that small Phillips screw through the side of the boiler housing there. Now that's all done, we'll put James on the track and give him a battery test before we move on to our second loco. And as you can see, James is now ready to go back into service, shunting trucks and pulling coaches in Tidmouth yards.
James was delighted and puffed away. Here are your trucks, James, said Thomas. The engines were glad when a visitor came. He purred smoothly towards them. The Fat Controller introduced him. Here is Diesel. I have agreed to give him a trial.
The second loco we're going to look at is this Thomas & Friends Diesel loco. This is in quite grubby condition, as you can see. One of the traction tyres appears to be wedged in the axle and the other is missing completely, and the body shell is covered in dust and grime from years of use by children. It's interesting to note that the body shell on this diesel shunter dates from the 1950s, and it was originally a trying model. Giving this model a battery test, there is no life at all, and I suspect that traction tyre is wedged in the axle there, preventing the wheels from turning, as when I did this you could hear the motor buzzing. To disassemble Diesel, first I remove the couplings that are held on by a screw at each end, and then to remove the body shell you have to insert a small flat bladed screwdriver as the body shell is held on with plastic clips. By gently pressing the clips down, the body releases from the chassis, and we've seen this chassis before when we looked at the duck locomotive in one of the earlier on episodes of Trash to Track. To remove that traction tyre, I'm going to have to remove them side rods. So using my hex nut screwdriver, I just gently loosen the side rod nut there in the middle wheel to release the side rods and allow me to pull the traction tyre out, which indeed appears to be stuck around the axle. Pulling it out gently proved it is quite tight in there, but gentle persuasion gets it out eventually, he says. But it was wedged in there quite firmly. Now I'm going to give it a battery test, and the wheels now seem to move a bit more freer, but they're covered in oxidisation, so we're going to need a good clean. I get a traction tyre out of the spares bin that we saw earlier and refit it to that middle wheel, ensuring that it's sitting correctly and not protruding from the wheel edges. I'm going to remove the wheels to give everything a good clean, and to do that you have to unclip this plastic base plate. And as you can see there is a jelly-like substance all stuck to the bottom of the chassis, which is the old lubrication which has dried over many years, and the axles are actually stuck in the die-cast frame. This is going to need a good clean-up before we can get this reassembled. Putting the model in the plastic tub, I use a WD-40 contact cleaner and just give it a good scooshing over and remove all that old lubrication, and then with a cotton bud and meth give it a good scrubbing, and this took some getting off. This stuff had gone like jelly. It's no wonder the axles didn't turn very well. There was a lot of fluff and gunk in that middle wheel there, where the gear is as well. I also give the chassis base plate a good clean up, as there was a lot of fluff and hair all wrapped around the brake blocks and all in the little gaps where the screws go. The axles were also given a good scrub over with meths and a cotton bud to remove years of caked on dirt and old lubrication. Once that was all done, I apply some silicone grease to the main drive worm in there, and then we can start looking at reassembling this model. Once the grease has been applied to all the cogs, the wheels were put back into their places on the chassis and were lubricated with the gear oil. I've also reassembled the side rods there that we took apart earlier to release that traction tyre. You can see now how easy these lift out now they've all been cleaned. It's no surprise that these wouldn't turn properly earlier on. The side rods go back together one way, and you use the hex nut screwdriver just to tighten that nut up in the middle there. Don't go mad with this, as you can end up stripping the threads in the wheels, as I have done in the past. Just tighten it gently until it needs no more force, and that should be sufficient to hold it in place. Now that that's all done, we can look at replacing the chassis base plate. Now everything's back together and that's reapplied with the screws, I'm going to attach the controller leads directly to the motor terminals there to get the wheels spinning, and then using the fiberglass pencil I'm going to polish the wheel faces up. These really were dirty. They were covered in oxidisation, and a build-up of carbon deposits were on each wheel face. I even cleaned the middle wheels to give the traction tyres a polish up. As you can actually see there, the wheels getting more shiny as I do it. Once I'd done all the wheels with the fiberglass pencil, I also went over the wheel backs and then used a cotton bud and meths to clean everything up and polish it up so it was all nice and clean. It's surprising how much dirt came off those wheels. It's no surprise really that it didn't work with a battery test. The chassis now with a battery test runs quite smoothly, so it's time to turn our attention to the body shell. As I said, this body shell from this shunter dates from 1957. So it's had some longevity and obviously served Hornby well over the years. Dusting the body shell down with a stiff paintbrush removes most of the dust, but I also give it a good wiping over with a couple of baby wipes just to remove some of the grubby marks off the side there. These baby wipes, as I've said before, really do come in handy. They remove all manner of dirt and fluff off the body shells without damaging any of the painted finish. Just look at that devious face on the end there. Now that it's all been done, all you have to do now is clip the chassis back into the body shell by engaging the clips in the back and then gently forcing the front down until the clips snap in and engage. And then we reattach the couplings on each end, and Diesel's just about ready to go back on into service. The screws for these are quite tiny, and again it's plastic thread. It's plastic threaded with metal screws, so don't go mad and over tighten them, otherwise you can end up stripping them out and having to glue the couplings on, which is not ideal. Once both couplings were reattached, Diesel was given a final battery test and was sent off into the yards to learn how to shunt trucks from the other engines on the island of Sodor.
Worthy Sir Topham Hatt thinks I need to learn. He is mistaken. We Diesels don't need to learn. We know everything. We come to a yard and improve it. We are revolutionary.
Well, revolutionary or not, he still needed the service of Trash to Track. I'm going to leave you now with some shots of James and Diesel running around my son's layout. Apologies again for the lack of turntable before and after shots, but I've had so much to repair just lately, I've overlooked the fact I've had to film those. Thanks again for watching Trash to Track. If you've got an engine you'd like to see featured on a future episode of Trash to Track, or would like to send in just for a general service or repair, please contact me at Dansmodelrailways@gmail.com and we'll have a look at getting it sent over. The email address is on your screen now. Thanks again for looking. I'll see you again in the next one. Bye for now.